You pull a loaf out of the refrigerator and it feels like a brick. 2 days ago it was soft. You paid $4 for that bread, and now the only thing it is good for is croutons. Most people put bread in the refrigerator because that is what you do with food you want to last. Milk goes in the fridge. Cheese goes in the fridge. Meat goes in the fridge. So bread should go in the fridge. Except bread does not work that way. The refrigerator does not slow down the thing that makes bread go stale. It speeds it up. Research in food science has measured this precisely. Bread stored in the refrigerator goes stale roughly 6 times faster than bread left sitting on the counter at room temperature. 6 times faster. The place you thought was protecting your bread is the very place that is ruining it the quickest. And the plastic bag most bread comes in is not much better. It fights one problem, but creates another one just as bad. Think about how much bread you have thrown away in the last year. A couple of slices here, half a loaf there. Maybe you tossed the heels because they dried out before anyone wanted them. If you buy bread every week and throw away even a third of each loaf, that is close to $60 or $70 a year going straight into the trash. That is real money. In this video, I am going to show you why your bread is going stale so fast, what the refrigerator and the plastic bag are actually doing to it, and the simple old method that keeps bread soft and fresh for days or even weeks, depending on the kind of bread you have, without a freezer, without a gadget, and without spending a penny. My name is Anna Byler. I was raised Amish in Ohio, where bread was baked at home and it had to last, because nobody was driving to the store twice a week for another loaf. The way we stored bread was something I learned from my mother before I was old enough to bake it myself. Now, to understand why the fridge is the worst place for bread, you need to know one thing about what happens inside a loaf after it comes out of the oven. When bread bakes, the starch in the flour absorbs water and puffs up into a soft, flexible structure. That is the tender crumb you love when you tear open a fresh loaf. But from the moment that bread starts to cool, those starch molecules slowly begin to rearrange themselves. They line up and lock into tight little crystals, squeezing out the water they absorbed during baking. The bread gets firmer, drier in texture, and eventually hard. That process is called starch retrogradation. You do not need to remember the name. What you need to remember is the temperature at which it happens fastest. It happens fastest between 32 and 41 degrees Fahrenheit. That is exactly the temperature range of your refrigerator, not the freezer. The freezer is so cold that it stops the process almost completely. The starch molecules cannot move, so the crystals never form. That is why frozen bread, when you thaw it, still tastes close to fresh. But the refrigerator sits in the worst possible zone, cold enough to accelerate the crystal formation, not cold enough to stop it. Your bread in the fridge is aging 6 times faster than it would have on the counter. It still has water in it, but the water is trapped inside those hardened crystals, so the bread feels dry and tough, even though it technically is not dried out. It is a structural change, not a moisture problem. So if the fridge is out, what about the plastic bag? That is what most bread comes home in. It should help, right? Plastic does one thing well. It seals moisture in. On day 1, the bread feels soft, but by day 2, you start to notice the crust is not crispy anymore. It has gone rubbery. The sealed bag trapped all the humidity right against the bread, and the crust absorbed it. A crusty loaf in a sealed plastic bag will lose its crust completely within a few hours. By day 3 or 4, the trapped moisture creates the perfect warm, damp space for mold. You open the bag and there it is, a blue-green spot forming along the fold of the crust. You throw the whole thing away. Plastic fights staling by holding moisture in, but it fights the crust and invites the mold. It trades one problem for 2. Paper bags go the other direction entirely. A paper bag lets air through too freely. A bakery loaf stored in a paper bag on the counter can feel like a rock by the second morning. The outside hardens first, and then the inside follows. Paper is fine for the walk home from the bakery, but it is not a storage solution. So what bread actually needs is something in between. Something that lets a small amount of moisture pass through so condensation never builds up, but holds enough moisture inside so the crumb does not dry out too fast. Something that breathes slowly. That is exactly what a simple piece of linen or cotton does. The method itself could not be simpler, and I want you to hear every step because the details are what make it work. Take a clean linen cloth, a cotton tea towel, or even a large cotton napkin. Lay the bread in the center. If it is a round loaf, fold the cloth loosely over and around it. If it is a long loaf, roll it gently. You are not wrapping it tight like a gift. You are covering it the way you would pull a light blanket over something. The cloth should touch the bread on all sides but not compress it. Set the wrapped bread on the counter at room temperature. Choose a spot away from direct sunlight and away from the stove or any heat source. A cooler corner of the kitchen is ideal. If your kitchen runs hot in summer, a pantry shelf or a cabinet with some airspace works even better. That is the whole method. No special equipment, no seal, no gadget. The fabric works as a gentle filter. It lets just enough air exchange happen that condensation never builds up against the crust, but it slows the outward flow of moisture enough that the crumb stays soft inside. The crust stays firm and dry, the way it is supposed to be, while the interior holds its texture. A good sourdough loaf wrapped this way on a cool counter will stay pleasant for 4 to 5 days easily. A dense whole wheat loaf or a heavy rye can hold even longer. Now, here is one small detail that makes a noticeable difference. If you have already sliced into the loaf, set it cut side down on a wooden cutting board before you drape the cloth over it. The exposed surface where you cut is the place moisture escapes the fastest. Pressing that face flat against the board seals it without adding any humidity around the crust. It is a tiny adjustment, but it will add a day or even 2 to the life of the loaf. A few things to keep in mind about the cloth itself. Linen is the traditional choice, and there is a reason. Linen fibers are naturally smooth and do not hold odors or crumbs the way terry cloth does. But a plain cotton tea towel works almost as well. What you do not want is a thick, fuzzy towel, because the texture traps too much moisture right against the crust, and you end up with the same rubbery surface you would get from plastic. Thin and smooth is what you are looking for. Wash the cloth every few uses. Just warm water and a little soap. No fabric softener, because the coating from softener blocks the pores in the fabric and defeats the whole purpose. Let it air dry. My mother used to set the bread at the back of the counter every evening after supper and lay a cloth over it, the way you would tuck a blanket around something you want to keep safe. The bread was never sealed. It was never left uncovered. It was somewhere in between, and that was the whole point. When I was young, I thought she was keeping the dust off. She was managing the moisture. Now, the title of this video says 2 weeks, and I want to be completely honest with you about that claim, because not all bread is the same, and I am not going to tell you something that does not hold up in your own kitchen. A loaf of sliced white sandwich bread from the grocery store is made to be soft and light. It has a high moisture content, very little natural acid, and a thin, delicate crust. That kind of bread, no matter how carefully you store it, is going to start showing its age after about 4 or 5 days on the counter. The cloth method will still outperform the refrigerator by a wide margin, and it will outperform the plastic bag because you will not get mold as early. But you are not going to get 2 weeks from a standard loaf of sandwich bread. That is just the nature of what it is made of. Where you start seeing real longevity is with denser, naturally leavened breads. Sourdough has a genuine advantage here. The long, slow fermentation process produces natural organic acids, the same kind of acid found in vinegar. Those acids do 2 things. They make the crumbs slightly more resistant to mold growth, and they give the bread a lower overall moisture activity, which means the crumb holds its structure longer. A well-made whole sourdough loaf with a thick crust, stored in linen on a cool counter, will stay good for a week without difficulty. Whole grain breads, and especially rye breads, hold moisture better than white flour breads because the bran and fibre in the flour act like tiny sponges. They absorb water during baking and release it very slowly over time. Dense European-style breads, the kind that feel noticeably heavy in your hand, were historically baked once a week and expected to last the full 7 days. A dark rye loaf wrapped in cloth, stored in a cool space, can genuinely hold its quality for 10 days, and in the right conditions, push toward 2 weeks. So the honest answer is this. The 2 weeks in the title applies to the right kind of bread stored the right way. And even for lighter breads, the cloth method still gives you more good days than the fridge ever would. If you want to push the results even further, there is an old piece of kitchen furniture that does exactly what the cloth does, just in a slightly more controlled way. A bread box. A bread box is not airtight. It has small vents or a loosely fitted lid that allows just enough air circulation to prevent condensation from building up inside. The enclosed space holds a thin layer of humidity around the bread, slowing the drying down, while the vents keep the inside from becoming the kind of damp chamber that grows mold. The combination that works best is cloth plus bread box. Wrap the loaf in a linen or cotton cloth, then set it inside the bread box. The cloth handles the close moisture management right against the surface. The box handles the broader environment. Together, they create a small, stable zone around the bread that is neither too dry nor too damp. A practical test published by a home baking site confirmed this. A loaf in a bread box with the cut side protected stayed close to its original texture for 3 full days, while the same bread stored uncovered or under a glass cloche went mouldy or dried out in the same period. You do not need an expensive bread box. A simple wooden one from a second-hand store or a yard sale works perfectly. A ceramic crock with a loose-fitting lid works. Even a clean, dry cabinet that you leave slightly ajar can serve the same function. The principle is identical. Create a small space that breathes slowly. One thing to watch for. In humid climates, especially during summer, even a bread box can hold too much moisture if the kitchen stays warm and damp. If you live somewhere humid, leave the bread box lid slightly open on the hottest days, or move the bread to the driest room in the house. The enemy is always trapped dampness. As long as air can move slowly, you are fine. If you already have a bread box sitting in the attic or at the back of a cupboard, pull it out. Your grandmother kept one for a reason, and the reason was not decoration. Here is something most people do not realize. Even when bread does go a bit stale, it is not ruined. The process is reversible. Remember what I said about the starch molecules locking into crystals? Those crystals melt when you heat the bread above about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That is why toast works. You are not just drying the surface brown, you are actually melting those hardened starch crystals back into their soft, flexible form. The bread feels fresh again because, at the molecular level, it briefly is. If you have a whole loaf or a large piece that has gone a little firm but has no mold on it, you can bring it back. Run the crust under the faucet for just a second, barely wet the outside. Then put it in the oven at about 350 degrees for 8 to 10 minutes. The moisture on the crust turns to steam, pushes back into the crumb, and the heat melts the crystals. When that bread comes out, it will have a crackly, warm crust and a soft center, and you would not know it had been sitting on the counter a day too long. This trick does not work on moldy bread. If you see even a small patch of mold, the bread is done, and you should throw it away. Mold sends invisible threads deep into soft food, and you cannot cut around it safely, and the revival does not work indefinitely. You can rescue a loaf once, maybe twice, but each heating cycle costs the bread a little more of its structure. After a couple of rounds, it just will not come back the same way. For a single slice that has gone a little firm, you do not even need the oven. A toaster does the same thing. That firm slice goes in stale and comes out with a warm, crisp surface and a soft center. If you have ever noticed that toast made from slightly stale bread actually tastes better than toast from a perfectly fresh slice, this is why. The stale bread has more structure to begin with, and when the heat melts the crystals and crisps the surface at the same time, you get a texture that fresh bread cannot quite match. But for a whole loaf that got a day ahead of you, the oven method is a genuine rescue. I have done this more times than I can count, and it has saved me from wasting bread that still had good meals left in it. Let me give you the short version of all of this, because it does not have to be complicated. If you are going to eat the bread within 3 or 4 days, wrap it in a cloth and leave it on the counter. Cut side down on a board if you have already sliced into it. That is the simplest approach, and it works for nearly any kind of bread. If you want it to last closer to a full week or beyond, use the cloth inside a bread box, a ceramic crock, or a cabinet with some air movement. Choose a denser bread, a sourdough, or a whole grain rye, and leave the loaf whole as long as you can. Every time you slice into it, you open a new surface for moisture to escape. If you baked or bought more bread than you can eat in a week, slice it. Separate the slices with pieces of parchment paper or wax paper so they do not freeze together. Put them in a bag and freeze them. Frozen bread keeps well for 2 to 3 months. When you want a slice, pull one straight from the freezer and toast it. It comes back beautifully. You would never know it had been frozen. And when the last few slices do start to firm up, do not throw them away. Cube them for croutons and dry them in the oven at a low temperature. Use them for bread pudding, for French toast, or for thickening a soup. Stale bread has been the base of real cooking for hundreds of years. The French built an entire soup around it. Nothing about a loaf that has gone a little firm means it has to go in the trash. And the one place that does not belong anywhere in this list is the refrigerator. Not for a day, not even for a few hours if you can help it. The fridge is for your milk, your cheese, and your leftovers. It is not for bread. The next time you bring a loaf home, try something different. Take it out of the plastic, wrap it in a clean cloth, and set it on the counter. Give it 3 days and then slice into it. Feel the crumb. It will still be soft, and you will wonder why you ever kept bread any other way. Tell me in the comments, how do you store your bread at home, and how long does it usually last? I am especially curious whether any of you still have your grandmother's bread box sitting in the kitchen. I read every comment, and I always learn something. God bless your home and everyone in it. I will see you in the next one.